Welcome to CSM Talk, the CSM podcast that focuses on two fundamental aspects of customer success: value to the customer and value to your organization. Today on Rule 40 Success, I'll be asking my guests to focus on a particular area of the Rule 40: new logo acquisition, upsell and expansion, churn or profitability, and give their point of view on how they would partner with customer success to drive aspects of the Rule of 40 and how this delivers customer value. Okay, got it? Good. Let's CSM talk. Good afternoon and welcome to CSM Talk, the Rule of 40. It's my great pleasure today to bring as a guest on our podcast our very first sales leader. I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna let her introduce herself. So, Olivia, welcome, and please introduce yourself to the guests.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So yes, I am Olivia. I work at a SaaS company, an AI SaaS company called Phrasee, and I'm currently managing the global sales team.
I'm going to ask you what I ask every guest on our podcast, and that's the icebreaker question. So the icebreaker question is in one word, not 5 words, 10 words, or 0 words. Sum up customer success.
It's so tricky, but I think if it is a real word, I'm going to go for customer centricity.
All right.
Can I explain that, or is that adding words?
Go for it.
Okay, fine. So just to give a bit of background as well. So my role, I started off in a hybrid role, account management and new business, sort of 11 years ago. And then I was purely new business. And then for the last 3 years before I managed the team was in existing business, but again, a sales role. And then I went into hybrid. So every iteration of how we can work with customer success and sales, I've sort of gone through. And the reason I say customer centricity is because for me, you've got 3 mindsets that you can have as a salesperson, whether that's new business or existing business. You can either think for yourself, so your target, your commission, what's good for you. You can either think from the business, so okay, have we got a board meeting coming up? Am I getting pressure from my boss? Do I need to act and be in a certain way that's going to be good for the business? Or can you think about the customer? Is it right to push for an upsell? Is it right for them to do this? Am I trying to get more out of them because that's right for them, or because it's driven from myself and the business? And in my experience, it's never ever a long-term success to do anything other than just be focused on the customer and think about what the customer wants and what's good for them. So that's why customer centricity.
Superb. And that also plays into customer success's raison d'etre, which is, driving plans and programs around quantifiable business outcomes and ROI. You make it about that, then, and you achieve that and deliver on that, then senior people at your customer are going to go, this pays for itself. I will buy more. I will refer people, this kind of thing. So
yeah, and actually from a sales perspective as well, I find like tactic makes it sound really underhanded, but maybe something that is an effective sales tool is often to say, actually, I don't think you need that right now. You can, this is the cheaper option. It gets you this far, etc. And then often the reaction is, okay, but actually I do think we want this. And so they kind of upsell them themselves. But because you're not pushing your agenda, you're thinking from their perspective, you gain that trust. And because you're doing it from, from the stance that's what's right for them, then often it does end working well for both parties.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. One thing I've seen it's worked in CS is actually saying, I know the outcomes you want to do. Well, I've put a program in place and here's my architects to talk to you about how you do this through in the system and optimize it. However, I know that I have an additional module here, which could actually accelerate the timescale of you realizing that ROI. Now, is that of any interest to you, of bringing that forward? If there is, what's the gain on that? And there'll obviously be a cost on this side, but I can bring in an A to talk about that. If not, then we can go ahead with this track, and this is fine. We'll still be doing this, but it'll be over a longer time frame. Now, I'm giving you options, right? That's quite empowering.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Cool. So customer centricity, with that in mind, what element, let me explain the rule of the rule of 40 to our viewers out there. And basically the rule of 40 is looking at this kind of framework that VCs use and CFOs use of looking at the kind of like the overall health of a company. And what it asks is, says, if your ARR growth, and that is new business ARR, that is upsell or expansion ARR, plus your churn ARR, plus your profitability equals 40% or above, then you're a healthy company. So if your net ARR growth is like, 80% and your profitability is minus 20%, you're at 60% net. That's really healthy. It's that trade-off between scalability, like the cost side of profitability, and growth, right? We've obviously seen over the past year, we've had to scale back to get profitability into a healthy place to bring that rule 14 to check, but growth hasn't been as much. So looking at that aspect of the rule of 40, which one would you like to concentrate on and discuss for this podcast?
So for me, I think what would be interesting is that upselling, so that existing business upsell opportunity, because I think it's where sales and CS really come together. And also, the stats vary depending on what report you're reading, but it's X amount more money to bring on a new customer than it is to retain or grow one. And yet so often the focus is new business top of funnel, and often we neglect to put the plans in place to grow customers.
Cool. All right. So, okay, with that in mind, the first thing I'd want to ask is, what does a good partnership look like between sales and CS with the objective of growing a customer?
I'm laughing because I don't think I know the answer, because I don't think a good relationship, really, it's going to depend on how we define the word good. I think there will always be a little bit of tension, I think, between sales and CS, particularly when it comes to upselling. I think good comes down to understanding roles and responsibilities, so there's no overlap, nobody feels like anybody's stepping on each other's toes. And good is good communication between the two, so there's everybody knows what they're doing, everybody knows how to communicate with each other internally, they know what actions sit within their job functions, and there's just a good culture from the company that means that they can work together and not be sort of put in conflict or being the one against the other, as some often cultures of businesses sort of permit that rivalry. But I think if you've got a good working relationship between CS and sales, and that's coming from top down, then that is the foundation for a good relationship.
So what kind of things would you want to see put in place to create that healthy relationship? I'm thinking in terms of operationally.
Yeah. And I think operationally there has to be something in place, because if anything's left to sort of gut feel or thought, that's when you get the tension and the grey areas and the conflict. So in place, I would suggest like clear definitions of roles and responsibilities. What does CS do? What does the salesperson do? And then the process. So what we look to do is basically map out the entire process from either new business to end of that first contract. So then let's say we do 12 months, or renewal, start of a renewed contract right the way through to the end of it. So within that process, understanding who does the new business deal in the first place, or who handles the renewal. Often I'd expect that to sit in sales. It certainly does in our organization. Once the contract's signed, what happens then? And usually that would be a clean handover to the CS. They own the relationship, they own the success of the customer. The salesperson then moves away. Then it becomes a little bit more interesting as to what happens next. So in our organization at Phrasee, we have the roles split so that the customer success team can own the relationship with the people that are using it. They're the ones that need to be successful. They're the ones that day in, day out we work with, and we need to understand what's important to them, what they're trying to achieve, what their KPIs are, and we align everything to that. And that's what the CS team do. So they have the weekly calls, they have the check-ins, they are presenting results in a format that the team needs to then present upwards, which then gives us an opportunity for a second voice and a second person to have potentially more senior relationships, not because they are more senior in their role or because they are better or skilled or different to the CS team, but solely because the more senior person in the customer's sphere is probably going to be the decision maker and the budget holder. And the salesperson needs to hold that relationship in order to upsell. So whilst opportunities may be found out from speaking to the team and the CS, it's for them to then hand over those opportunities to the salesperson who can then run the commercial conversation. And in our experience, it then creates a separation, so you don't get any conflict of I'm trying to push my agenda on the customer. Again, going back to customer centricity and thinking of them all the time in your mindset. CS are then empowered to do that because they don't have an agenda of needing to upsell. They don't have a target or a number. That then sits with the salesperson completely separately. So that's the process we have, and it's quite clean cut. And I think in order to have that good working environment, a clean cut process is what's needed.
So one of the challenges sometimes that CS has in terms of proving value and proving outcomes is that lack of C-level exposure within the customer. If that sits exclusively with sales, there is sometimes a disconnect of, well, we never see the C-level person. They only hear from us when we've got a commercial opportunity. If we had, no, I'm not saying, nobody's saying that the CSM has weekly calls with like the CFO or the CMO or whatever, but maybe there is, where it sometimes can work well is that they are the sponsor that sits at the beginning of going, this is our value realization program. This is what we're doing on a day-to-day level with your team. But every quarter, we might have a Q bar, we check in to show you if the needle's turned on delivering value to you. I mean, have you seen that happen, of keeping that there so that the customer's exec has something to come back to the table for to talk to CS about, of going, well, actually, where are we at?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I think in order to achieve that, I've seen what can work well is to have different tiers within the CS function. So then perhaps you've got, customer success directors or senior directors, and then you sort of customer success managers, customer success assistants, and then that can be chunked up. And yes, I do agree, because they're, again, if I'm saying, there's no conflict of interest because no one's got an agenda, but a salesperson always has an agenda. They've always got a number to hit. So are they going to have the most neutral relationship? Possibly not, but a CSD, they probably would. And then you're right, that's a senior, not C-level to C-level, but close enough, senior to senior, that you can probably then start to think more strategically, more long-term, and have those conversations that you wouldn't have with your day-to-day team, which again will feed back to what the salesperson needs to know in terms of planning out growth.
How do you coordinate all of this?
A very good question. So again, going back to that good working relationship and communication. So our sales individuals will work on accounts with their CS team. And it's very much, we trusted them very much to have those relationships internally and to have good communication. What we suggest is weekly one-to-ones, so that you run through all of your accounts, all of the next steps that you've got, and who needs to do what in order to retain and grow the account. So internal communication and internal relationships. Also, we do have, so where I manage the global sales team, my counterpart, she manages the global CS team. So there's already somebody who is managing the customer managers.
Okay. Is there any joint account planning that has the sales part, which is, the people, the politics, the influence, the business objectives, the white space of what we want, and then maybe the CS part in that plan as well, which is, well, this is what the health looks like, the usages, the use cases, how we're delivering against the business objectives, and putting the two together Is that something that's happening?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we have a piece of software that allows us to track. So where we've got a sales tool like our CRM system where we can track opportunities, etc., that we have a CS equivalent where they can track customer health and org structure and contact roles, etc., and then the progression of the conversations that have happened over the year. And it's great to have all of that data in place. And yes, you're right, they will be able to track on sort of a weekly basis what's going well, what isn't going well, if there are any red flags. And then as a business globally, we get together and we have internal RAG reviews, so red, amber, green on the accounts. Like if there's anything in amber, right, what can we as a business, so not even just sales and CS, but do we need to pull product in, do we need data science, do we need marketing, anything that we can do as a business to pull together and make sure an amber goes back to a green, or if something's in a red, which you hope it never is, how can we pull that to amber and back to green? So there, yeah, that's like a big collaboration that happens on a weekly basis as well.
And that health pulled out onto renewal your renewal forecasting, right? Your renewal opportunities in your CRM, right? Is the health pulled out onto there, so that maybe if you're looking at you're not going to look at renewals a quarter out, you're probably looking at them 6-9 months out, right?
Yeah.
And having that, so 6 months out, 9 months out, here's what my rags are against these, and these are the big issues. So your plans start a lot earlier in terms of getting it to good health. So by the time you come into 3 months, you're like, we're really into commercials. We're into that's what we're into. That is 3 months in, it's really just about commercials. There shouldn't be any health work needed to be done.
So basically everything. So what we look to implement, and this is led by the sales individual, is 6 months into an agreement or halfway. So if it's a 24-month agreement, it's the 12-month mark. But usually we say 12 months, so it's 6-month mark. Have a halfway happiness meeting with the decision maker. And this is, again, just going back to where we do make a little bit of a distinction as to who speaks to who. So divide and conquer. So the salesperson will stay in touch with the decision maker, the budget holder, the signatory, if they're the same person, but separately if they are different, to foster those relationships through the contract. So you're not just getting in touch when you need to renew it. So to have that halfway happiness meeting and say, are you happy? If you're not, why not? Right, well, then that's an amber red flag that we've potentially missed. Now we can go back to the CS team and collaborate on how we fix it. And if we need to reach out to the wider business, we can do that. If they say, yeah, no, we're really happy, then the conversation is great. How do we do more of the same, or make you even happier and get into that upsell conversation? And that should happen at the 6-month mark. So there are absolutely no surprises as to whether or not we're going to churn a client. And we have enough time to then forecast these upsell opportunities within the financial year.
Okay. So that sounds like opportunity or upsell generation throughout the life cycle of that customer. Which then means as a rep, I'm going to you, well, Olivia, I can't tell you my number for the year. I'll tell you like halfway through. How do you take a step back and maybe let's look at territory planning? So how might that work in terms of your account plans are fine, but from that there might be some white space or additional usage, or things that out of the account plan must come. Here's my things to mitigate churn or downsell. So they're my actions, which I might take on the CS side. But also, here's what we're aiming as an account team to get more usage, additional modules and things like that. And then when you take that account plan, you aggregate that up, and then all of a sudden that's my territory plan to you saying, at the CS organization, this is what I think we're going to be able to assist you in doing. And that's your total territory forecast number that you give back to the board and stuff.
Yeah. And a good summary of what it looks like. I think also to add is, whilst we have these 6 months happiness meetings for renewal and upsell, not all of our customers sort of start at the same time. So they're staggered throughout the year. So we can there's a good spread so that we don't have this gap. But also what we do is our reps are hybrid. So they are responsible for new business and upsell as well on the sales side. So there should be any sort of gap in that waiting, you know, once the contract has been renewed or won, and you've got the CS heavy first 3 months, potentially first 6 months, there should be new business coming in and plugging that.
You've got these ideas on how you want to establish where, you know, customer success and A's are with their accounts and what it looks like, where you're trying to get them to, how you mitigate them. What are the good, you know, if I'm your counterpart, right, what are the leading metrics we should be looking at as team leaders throughout the year that tells us that, yeah, when we have our cadence meeting, or we have like our management meetings, right, what is looking like a healthy collaboration between CS and sales? What's our dashboard look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it sounds incredibly basic, but in the world of SaaS, the leading metrics it's usage. Like, how much are they using our technology? And if there's any sort of drop in usage, testing, etc., it's a huge red flag, and that's a red flag for CS and for sales. So, and it's really, really interesting, because this is where I think the conversation of upsell slips into churn, because if somebody's not using your technology, you're never going to get an upsell. And then you're just talking about mitigating churn, because nobody's going to pay for something that they're not using. And then does that sit with CS because it's a usage and retention is more their bag? Or is it, you know, the sales potentially for bringing in an opportunity in the first place that isn't as well adapted, or they weren't ready for it? And again, coming back to that idea of customer centricity, were we thinking of the customer when we sold this in the first place? Or have we pushed something through that doesn't sit right with them, and therefore they're not using it, or they didn't have the resource, or they haven't got the integration in place? So a really basic thing in the world of tech and software, but usage is a really key thing. And then that collaboration internally of, okay, CS, like, how can we get the customer using again? Because there is no conversation about upsell if they're not using our basic software in the first place.
Okay, so if we look at usage, are there any other you know, indicators, and I would say leading indicators, that are showing that, you know, my team, my organization's relationship with yours is working in sync, is collaborating?
Yeah. So and again, back to upsell. So one, and the halfway happiness meeting of like, are we doing well? Great, then let's do more of it. So we do customer plans, and one of the things that we look to have with all of our customers is it's like a maturity model effectively. And more and more conversations we're having with customers that we've worked with for a really, really long time, like, from a sales perspective, you always think you need to be consultative, you need to understand what their needs are, what their challenges are, and how our solution can overcome them. And actually, more and more recently, I think, just because of change in the environment, etc., is that people don't want to sit and talk about their situation. They want us to come in and tell them what good looks like. So tell us what a great example of what a customer is doing using your tech and the results that they're getting, and then we want to see how to implement that. So what we've then created with the CS team is these maturity models of, this is our North Star of the most wonderful customer using Phrasee's technology, and this is what they look like, this is the results they get, and this is where you are. Or like, this is the most basic version, and this is where we can plot against that. So again, that's another thing that we use in terms of understanding whether we're completely in sync and whether this is a good customer relationship is, are they using our technology? And if so, to what extent, how well? And if not as well as it could be, how can we, either sales or CS in conjunction, bring them up to that next level? And often, of course, there will be a level of upsell into getting them to another stage of maturity. So it's sort of baked in.
Cool. So that kind of, that maturity level of, there was basically success that people are seeing out of Phrasee, right? That's, you know, as we progress you up here, there's more investment on your side because you're seeing more success on yours. That's great. So that's something that customer success can drive, and we can monitor that between ourselves and going, well, you know, I've got 30% of my customer base, which is in this quartile or whatever, and on this part of the journey, and this part of the journey, and these kind of things. So we've got maturity, we've got usage, and there's probably all the other things that may be quite basic of, like, have all our reps done account plans with the accounts they want to get money out of, which is quite it's the eternal kind of territory planning situation I get in with sales leaders, which is, oh yeah, I want a CSM on every account. Well, you're not going to get one. So can you tell me what your expectation is of getting revenue out of your part of the business, right? Which is going to be upsell, which are the ones that are going to be desperate on churn that we need to protect. And on those decisions, I can tell you what coverage model we get in terms of, you've got to give me your plan and I can build something to support that. But always it has been, with those ones you're nominating that you want dedicated CSMs on, I need an account plan. No account plan, and I know what we're not doing, and I know we're not connected, so you don't get your CSM. So
yeah, it's true. And again, from a sales perspective as well, it's so we run an exercise, the willing versus able exercise, which is willing on one side, able on the other, and then you've got your quadrant, and it's if they're both willing and able to progress with us, then great, then that's where we prioritize. And I define willing by there's a desire to, they're using the software, it's going well, we've got senior stakeholders bought in, and able as, do they have the technology to progress with us? Can we integrate into other channels? Have they got the budget? Are we within their budget cycles? So willing and able, and then you've got your other ones which are, they're willing but they're unable. So yes, everybody's absolutely bought in, but they got no budget, we need to wait until January, or we need to wait till wherever, or we haven't convinced senior leadership that this is something that they should invest further in. So again, that's when CS can say, right, pull in sales, have that connect, and then have a commercial conversation. And then are they able but unwilling? Is that right? Have I just said that one? No, that is correct. I'm confusing myself.
It's probably the last combination left, right?
The last combination, yeah.
Or the quadrant.
Of the quadrant, which is that, they just need more convincing. And then if that's the case, then we can reach out to other customers, customer testimonials, maybe some case studies from marketing. And if they're neither willing nor unable, that's a massive churn risk. And that's another thing as well. If there's no potential growth and we haven't got a good connection, they're not using us properly, then we just know that we can flag that out. And whilst not a good situation, at least we can forewarn the business of potential churn.
And you do this willing and able kind of quadrant on each account plan, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Because then you can aggregate that up and go, well, this is the state of my business, right?
Yeah, and that's again where CS and sales work really well together, because you can do an account plan and they go, this account is great, it's really big, spend loads of money with us, got so much potential. And then you can go as a salesperson, you go, yeah, but they're not willing or they're not able. And actually, these are massive blockers. So there's no point prioritizing this. Let's prioritize another account together. And so it just helps you sort of map your time.
And an account strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
They're not willing and able at the moment. They're almost like, I don't want to call it this, but they're in a kind of retention mode.
Yes,
you were
exactly.
there to purely, it's a good way of actually looking at who might prime the account, right?
Right. And going back to roles and responsibilities, like if it's pure retention, salesperson can take a step back, and that CS can really take lead.
Yeah. And then look at when there may be potential opportunities, and because you're going to be doing QBRs, and hopefully these QBRs, you're bringing in the senior person on their side with the counterpart of a CS director on their side. And that's the people who can do the nurturing and discovering on potential other opportunities and going, well, actually, do you know what? We get this project finalized and done well. There's the opportunity opening up. All of a sudden, we can bring the salesperson back in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
whilst
exactly.
we free up all that bandwidth then for them to go and hunt new business.
Yeah, exactly. Another part of the account plan exercise that we've been running as well, and again, just looking at the different roles with CS and sales, is spheres of influence. So where the customer success team will usually map the organization, so we know who reports into who. What the salesperson will do is map the sphere of influence, because so often in an organization the two aren't the same. And we've had situations where the CMO won't speak to us, they don't want to know, they're the most senior person, but they completely trust their team to get on and do it. So whilst they sign the contract, they've got their point person, and that point person makes the decision. So they are the most important person in that organization, despite not being the most senior. And often, sometimes the users will have such a big sway in a decision as to whether or not to use a technology or to have a different feature added on, etc., that if we just look at the org chart from potentially a sort of account plan CS perspective, it's not going to give us a true view of how that sale or upsell is made possible, because we haven't got the sphere of influence necessarily mapped. So again, CS and sales work and collaborate on that to understand the actual structure, but then who's got the power within the organization to make decisions.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, influence is important, right? So you've got the internal influence, but also make sure that you're in the ear of the CMO somehow by people who are influencing them, because Monday, Salesforce might come along and go, hey, do you know what? We'll fly you out to Dreamforce. You should look at exactly what we've got here for you. And then they'll come back and go, I know Phrasee works really well, but you know what? Guess what I saw at Dreamforce? So, being in that ear through influencing the CMO is obviously, you've got that on the account plan as well. So
yeah. But again, I think that's where we go back to having it so important to have these tiers within a CS department and within a sales department as well, to be able to have the appropriate conversations at the appropriate level. And that's not to say somebody like a customer success director could not have a relationship with the CMO. Of course they could. What I found is just, does the CMO want to have the conversation? Are they willing to give their time to have a conversation with a tech vendor? Not necessarily. So that's why I find it works very well to have a tiered approach, and maybe it's you have a very senior CS person that handles the CMOs.
Coverage, all about coverage, right? And you know what? If you've got a CS person, a CS director talking to the CMO, and a sales director talking to the CSMO, what do we get to do when we come back indoors? We triangulate.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Right. To wrap up, what's the TTT, the top 3 tips of sales and CS working together?
Oof, TTT. Okay, so top 3 tips. Communicate with each other, honestly. Just what you can get from just talking to each other goes such a long way for a good relationship. So good communication is the number one. Second is roles and responsibilities. If you are so clear on what each other does, nothing falls through the cracks and nobody gets upset that they're treading on each other's toes. And then the third, I think, is I was going to say planning or pre-planning, but that kind of falls into communication, so it's cheating a little bit. But good, like QBRs, meetings, knowing who's going to say what, that you've prepped beforehand so that there are no surprises, because there's nothing more damaging to a CS sales relationship than somebody doing something in front of a customer that was not planned. And I think that wound cuts very deep and is hard to forgive. So pre-planning, good communication, roles and responsibilities, and then good pre-planning before any meeting.
And of course, the planning also comes back to the account and territory planning. And then the communication is the cadence that revises that plan, revisits it. So like the plan's not set in stone at the beginning of like the year for tick box exercise. So you and I can go do forecasts.
Yeah, exactly. And you're so right. That solid account plan is really just going to be, it's the map that you use, isn't it, for success? Correct. Yeah.
Cool. Olivia, this has been fantastic. I could be spending the whole afternoon.
I know, it's so sad, isn't it? It's such a great conversation.
Cool. All right. So, well, thank you very much for being our guest on CSM Talk. If people want to get in touch with you, is LinkedIn the best way to do that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So Olivia Knighton on LinkedIn, and as I said, Phrasee is the company I work at.
Well, I'll make sure I have the details against the podcast in Spotify and on YouTube. So thank you very much for your time.
Not at all. Thank you so much for inviting me.